Hello and welcome to our 17th Thrive webinar. Today's topic is on sustainability, on building and creating sustainable communities, both locally and globally. And we are collaborating with ISIC at York University. So I'll pass it on to Vanessa to share a little bit on what they do.
Thank you, Mario. Hello, Thrivers. My name is Vanessa Kwok, and I am the Vice President of Volunteer Exchanges of ISIC in York, a local branch of ISIC. ISIC is the largest youth-led, non-for-profit international organization offering leadership development opportunities to youth and cross-cultural internship and volunteer experiences. Our exchange opportunities range from projects working towards the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or with established businesses or educational institutions. Due to the pandemic, we are currently focusing on developing youth leadership and building career-ready skills through operations and events like these, while closely monitoring the COVID-19 traveling situation for exchange considerations. If you are interested in learning more about our various opportunities, feel free to reach out to us at ISIC in York on Instagram or register at ISIC.org under York as the local office. With that, I'd like to pass it back to Mario.
Thanks, Vanessa, and feel free in the comments on Facebook to share more about ISIC and share any links for sure. With that in mind, we'll pass it on to all our lovely panelists who are joining us. We have Matt, Rosemary, and Enne. Is that correct?
And it's Ian. Yeah, thanks, Mario.
Ian, sorry. And just tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do. So, Rosemary, why don't you join first or share first?
Thank you, Mario. It's great to be here with all the Thrivers. My name is Rosemary Powell, and I am the Executive Director of the Toronto Community Benefits Network. Our organization is a not-for-profit. We are a community labor coalition that is membership-based with over 120 member organizations and groups from across the city of Toronto who are all coming together on a platform of community benefits, making sure that whenever infrastructure projects are being built, that it includes the voice and the labor of the local community. And my background is in employment services, mainly working with youth and women and, just about anyone who is interested in pursuing a career. I've had a long history and background working in employment and social services.
Great. Ian, you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Mario. So my name is Ian Underwood, and for the last 9 years, I've been CEO of Habitat for Humanity Greater Toronto Area. Many people will have heard of Habitat for Humanity. We're a global housing charity. So we operate on every continent through what we call locally governed affiliates. So kind of like there's hospitals all over the place, all of them are locally governed. So I run the Habitat for Humanity that is here in the Greater Toronto Area. And in brief, so many people are familiar with the name, and if you are, you probably hear Habitat for Humanity and you think of a picture in your mind of volunteers swinging hammers, helping build homes for lower income people. All of it, and many of you may think of Jimmy Carter, a former US president who's been a huge volunteer with Habitat. All of those things are true. That is who Habitat is. But what a lot of people don't realize is our model is not, we don't give the homes away. What we are actually doing is helping people have an adequate home, so a home that's adequate and affordable for their family's needs, but that a home that they own. So in addition to building homes, and we don't build all of the homes, we now work with a lot with developers. So the homes are being built by developers, not by volunteers. Some of our homes are volunteers, some, as I said, are developers. But no matter how that home is built, what we're doing is we are partnering with a working lower income family, helping them take money that would otherwise have been used for rent and instead have that money go into a home that works for them, that's quality, that's safe, etc., and that the money that would have been rent is really now becoming their money. They're building equity, they're building generational wealth that they can pass on to their children. So that's in short what we do. And as we go through the conversation, I'll connect the dots as to how that kind of model can help create a more inclusive, a stronger, a more prosperous, and a more sustainable community for everyone who lives in it.
Awesome. And what about you, Matt?
Thanks, Mario. My name is Matt Carrick. I'm president at Subterra Renewables. Subterra Renewables is a geothermal utility provider and installer. So we work with local, we're based in GTA here. We work with multi-use buildings, both apartments and condominiums, as well as commercial buildings to install geothermal systems. The very brief introduction to geothermal is that it's a low carbon heating and cooling solution, which replaces fossil fuel combustion on site. So a really drastic carbon reduction, greenhouse gas emission reduction on site. Our business has two major service lines. One is the actual construction arm, which installs the systems, does the drilling, et cetera. And the other side is a development and utility side, which can provide some financial support to developers who are looking to go green, but are experiencing the hurdle of additional capital costs. So there's a bit of a mismatch in incentives. Traditionally, developers and builders know that they want to build green, but when they have to pay more to do so, it becomes challenging. So we're helping remove that barrier. My personal background is in engineering, so I come from a technical stream and have moved into the development world and have been in with Subterra for the last 4 years.
Awesome. Thanks so much for all the panelists for sharing a little bit about themselves. I'm really excited to hear, the diverse perspectives from building homes to communities to renewable systems. So it will be very interesting to hear all those perspectives. Myself, I'm Mario, the founder of Thrive, and we recruit and train young talent for impact-driven businesses, currently mostly in Toronto and Montreal, but we will hopefully expand globally because also our community is in 20 different countries. We have 360 members now. With that in mind, let's jump right into the first question. So first question really is about what have been the trends you've seen over the last 5-10 years, say, in building sustainable communities and cities? What has changed, and what's kind of like the hot new movements in that sector? And I don't know if maybe Ian, you want to start first?
Yeah, and you're right. We have a very different panel of coming at this from very, very different perspectives. So I'll speak to a couple of them that are familiar to me. And I think when we use the word sustainability, we're really thinking of how do we have communities and cities that work for everyone and continue to work for everyone from one generation to the next. And maybe, and Mario, I apologize for digressing, but I'm thinking as I say that, it's probably important for us to all acknowledge, as we have this conversation, we're doing so on the traditional territories of Indigenous people, in our case of the Huron-Wendat, the Petun, the Seneca, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and many First Nations peoples that now call this region home. And on the topic of sustainability, I'm actually quite inspired by a Haudenosaunee tradition of the seven generations principle, which some of you may have heard. And the notion is to make decisions by looking backwards over 7 generations, of drawing on the wisdom from 7 generations behind, but looking ahead to decisions and asking, would these decisions make sense and make life work for 7 generations down the road? I would say when you come back to that and you think of trends today, the two that are most particularly on my mind interrelate. One is we came from a history in Canada, or certainly Canadian cities, of sprawl, of just building out and out and out, to the point that today in the province of Ontario, only 5% of the land in this province is agricultural. So our ability to be sustainable from a food supply has been threatened by how we choose to grow. That's separate and apart from the environmental impacts of sprawl. So we can talk about it more later in the conversation, but certainly something that is very much a part of how do we build more sustainable cities is we build them differently than we did in the past. We think differently about what home looks like, about what community looks like, and have much greater density of those cities. The other point I'll make, and I'll make it quickly, but I'll be coming back to it again and again, I'm sure, in the conversation, is we pay attention to affordability. So right now we are, and I love the fact that this, the people listening in today are all of, the next generation, you as a younger generation, and my generation has benefited greatly from land planning and principles that benefit people born white in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and to a lesser extent 80s. We've done well in terms of owning homes that are now worth lots of money. It is now not affordable to rent a home in this city for an average or lower income family, and it certainly isn't affordable to own a home. That does not lead us to a sustainable city that works. I've taken too much airtime. I'm dying to talk more about these things, and I'll come back to them later, but hopefully that gets us started.
Just briefly, I saw on LinkedIn the home prices since 1996 in Toronto, they claim, have increased by 450%. So it's a huge, if you bought a house then, you're lucky now because you can really sell it for quite a bit. Why don't we go to Matt?
Yeah, sure. So I think it is interesting here, Ian, the sort of perspective shift. My perspective has been very hyper-focused for most of my career, and a lot of the work that I do now on sort of the single building scale, let's say. So when we're talking about sustainable communities, that certainly expands to things like community planning, transportation planning, the type of populations that live in certain areas. My world has largely been about how do we make this one building or this block of buildings or this district of buildings sustainable. And to me, what that really means, or the driving piece of what that means, is climate action. So reducing the energy consumption and the greenhouse gas emissions associated with those buildings. So in terms of trends that I see over the last number of years, there's been a large push, both politically from things like the Toronto Green Standards that are mandating new buildings to go green, to things like formerly cap and trade and now carbon tax. Again, sort of driving our communities, but also people seeing the value in that, and seeing that consumers and people who are buying homes and renting homes want to live in green spaces, and so folks are more and more understanding that we're working towards a net zero future by 2050, ideally, to try to address the climate change issue or the environmental issue that we're facing right now. So that's on a hyper focused level. We can talk about all the sort of technology and things that sort of go into that. But the one thing I'll point out, and I think sort of supports your point, Ian, is that if the people that are in that building are not passionate about being in those buildings, then they're not going to take care of them. And when you look at different sustainability rating systems for buildings, some of the things you'll see are things like beauty and biophilia and connection with nature, and those sort of pieces that are not necessarily going to save you kilowatt hours of electricity, for example, but that are going to help the people, the occupants in those buildings, appreciate those buildings, take care of those buildings, and have work towards the longevity of those buildings.
Rosemary, did you want to add to any of that?
Yes, yes. And, just building off, what's already been said, what the Toronto Community Benefits Network has really been at the forefront of the community benefits movement in Toronto and in Canada. And really, it's about, movements of movements coming together. There's the housing movement and the for low income, the environmental movement, the labor movement. All our society is recognizing that there's really a disparity of income that continues to grow. And the rich keeps getting richer and the poor keeps getting poorer. And as we look at, infrastructure and, where our taxpayers dollars are going, there is a real outcry from the community to say, well, hey, wait a minute, stop. How do we make sure that these benefits are being, offered also to those people who have been historically disadvantaged? Those people from equity-seeking groups who are finding themselves, challenged by the socioeconomic challenges in their local communities, who continues to be bearing the brunt of the burden in terms of, poverty in our local communities. How can you build an $8.5 billion transit project that is running through in Toronto? We call them neighborhood improvement areas that have been identified as such because of, just the high levels of unemployment and socioeconomic challenges that the residents in those local communities are facing. How can you build an $8.5 billion of taxpayer-funded, infrastructure project around, passing through those neighborhoods without considering how does the Black and racialized peoples and Indigenous peoples and newcomers, who's been really left out of Canada's prosperity. How do we make sure that they also can benefit from the jobs and opportunities that are being created from these projects? How do we make sure that they have a voice at the decision-making table? And so community benefits is a policy objective, that we have and that our movement for community benefits is all about, making sure that when these decisions are going to be made, when the spending is going to happen, that there is an intentional effort that is looking at, not just when the project is built, being able to use it, but while it's being built, the construction jobs that come out of it. These are good paying jobs, long-term sustainable jobs that can sustain families for years. And just the pride of being able to participate in building up your infrastructure in your neighborhood, in your city. It's something that that is, it's so powerful, right? How do you, those jobs like, professional, administrative and technical jobs, the designer, architect, how do you make sure that people have a voice and can contribute to the planning of what these structures are going to look like so that they can work for the people in the long term? How do we make sure that these $8.5 billion project gets broken down so that the mom and pop shop, the local business, the social enterprise can actually afford to be able to bid on the contracts and get opportunities out of it, so that local dollars can circulate within that community? How do we make sure that it's not just an infrastructure project that doesn't work for people that gets built? How do we make sure that there's childcare spaces, that there's low-income housing, that also gets delivered to the people who have to live and bear the brunt of the burden, in those communities? How do we make sure that there is a legally binding commitment in place that is going to describe all of the community's vision and the commitments that all the different stakeholders, from the client owner of the project to the contractor of the project to the government departments of the project, et cetera, the subcontractors, the unions who are the ones hiring, those workers? How do we make sure that all stakeholders are on the same page? There's a blueprint that we're all working towards to make sure that this community benefits happen. So we require that through community benefits, there is a monitoring and tracking and evaluation process so that we can determine the change over time, right? There's a target. We, for our apprenticeship program, for example, we have been able to achieve a 10% target. Not where we would necessarily, be ideally wanting to go, since Toronto is made up of over 50%, racialized peoples and newcomers and women. We want to see at least that kind of 50% reflected in the workforce. Right now, it's such a small number. But we're going to start with 10%, but the next year and the year after that, where are we going to? What is our vision? So this is what community benefits agreements is doing for us right now. And we're getting community benefits agreements as part of government policy at all levels of government.
Thanks for sharing, everyone. Yeah, I think there's so many layers involved in building sustainable communities, and great that all of you are kind of approaching it from different ways. And hopefully for the viewers, you can also see there's so many job opportunities and different roles that you can take on. So I'm going to shift the questions around a little bit than we had arranged, because I know Ian and Rosemary have been kind of already discussing quite a bit of this. But the second question is, what can cities do to sustainably grow? Like Ian was saying, like a lot of these cities are growing quite quickly, while still ensuring that communities remain diverse and inclusive. So Rosemary, I mean, you have already touched quite a bit on this, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit more.
Yeah, thanks. No, I mean, I think it really has to be an intentional commitment, that we make where, nobody gets left behind. Nobody gets left behind. And, COVID has shown us, it's exacerbated the differences, the inequalities that we're already seeing in our city, already seeing in our economy. And so we got to be able to do things differently, right? And so, yes, we are proposing the community benefits approach as, one lever that we can all apply in order to create the change that we want to see and to make sure that no one gets left behind. Those Black and racialized peoples, who, have been, left out of the economy, who's been left out of the workforce, put the programs in place the pathways that is going to get them into these good paying opportunities. And as we seek to, to go into this new green economy, what are we going to say to those who have been left out of our existing economy? How are we going to make sure that they're actually prepared to take the next step and to be, following careers in geothermal, for example? How do we make sure we train up and build up and support the next generation so they don't get left behind?
For sure. And Ian, you want to maybe continue on that thought? Because I know you already mentioned a few topics as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mario. And so, yes, to everything that you've heard Rosemary say. And let me add a couple things. First of all, let's just also kind of anchor, why is this notion of inclusion? So what Rosemary's described of, creating avenues for prosperity for everyone in the city, like, why is that important to sustainability? And I'm reminded of a report that United Way of Greater Toronto Area did a few years ago, where they, provided a lot of research that shows that cities with greater levels of income inequality are not healthy cities. They are cities with much greater levels of, much lower levels of optimism, less level of productivity in the workplace, less level of sense of community cohesion, higher levels of crime, greater levels of just social kind of division and dissent. And I think all of those characteristics, well, that's not the city we want for ourselves and for our children. And beyond that, it's just a basic human value. Of course, we want everyone to thrive, because when everyone thrives, we really do get the most productive, the most vibrant economies. So, okay, now let's come back to more building on what Rosemary has said too. So what can cities do? And something I spent quite a bit of my time on over the last 3 months is I had the privilege of being appointed as a member of a task force. Some of you may have seen some media coverage on this. It was called the Ontario Housing Affordability Task Force. It was we were asked to make recommendations for how to improve housing supply in the city. And a couple important things come out of that relates to this conversation about sustainability. Going back to my comment of, I'm from a different generation than most of you. And as Mario stated, that's a generation that benefited from buying early. And now my generation benefits from land planning policies that advantage people like me who are white people in the 50s, and disadvantage the next generation, disadvantage newcomers and racialized and the racialized population. And a big part of that is because now 70% of all of our land in the city that is zoned for housing is zoned so that the only thing you can build or have is a single or a semi-detached home. Well, that doesn't work very well in this city. And so, one of the things, what can we do to change that? And neighborhoods are set up so that to be able to keep neighborhoods that way, because when anyone wants to do a new development, an invitation goes out to the people in the community to come to be consulted on, are you supportive of this development? And more times than not, people will say, no, I'm not. It's going to take away, it's going to give me a shadow in my backyard. It's going to take away some green grass on the other side of the fence. It's going to take away, it's going to add traffic. So we have had a system that is so biased towards people who already have privilege and housing, and it is disadvantaged to people that need to get housing. So there are changes, and we talked about a lot of them in this report I was part of. There are changes we can make at just how we make housing decisions for what gets made, what gets built, how it gets built, who gets to influence what gets built, and how long it takes to build it. So that's one thing of just making changes around rebalancing power over this land is everyone's land. Again, one of the great things from Indigenous tradition, it's we all steward this land together. We all should make decisions about having these resources work for everyone. So maybe I'll stop there because we want Matt to get a word in edgewise as well. So Matt, back to you on what can cities do.
Yeah, sure. So a fact that I just read over the weekend that comes to mind here is the net immigration per year that's coming into the Golden Horseshoe, and I won't get the number exactly right, but I think it was around 150,000 net immigration per year in the GTA, and that's a heck of a lot of people when you spread that over the next tens of years, 20 years on the sort of scale that we're talking about. In terms of development and planning, that's not something that happens overnight. That all happens on the course of tens of years, 5, 10, 20 years. At the same time, the other fact that's at play here in the Golden Horseshoe is, of course, the green belt that surrounds our the GTA. And so really what's happening in the GTA is we've become an island where we've almost become like a Manhattan, where we can't go any further south, obviously, into the water, and we can't go any further north outside towards the exterior with the sprawl. So the question is really how do we densify? And I'll just share another quick anecdote. My hometown is Edmonton, Alberta, where there is nothing but space to sprawl. And so the city there, I always call it a big small town, just continues to go out and out and out. And I worked for a summer in transportation when I was doing co-op placements. And there was a document called the 1995 Transportation Master Plan that established a plan to have people and goods move efficiently through the city, which really meant build a lot of roads and have a core and suburbs and a bunch of ring roads around to get everybody there. And so when I was working there, it was the mid-thousands. and they had succeeded at their goal of the 1995 master plan, and all of a sudden in the 2008, I think, master plan, they said, okay, scrap all of this. We're going to have nodes of density with public transit and walkable neighborhoods and all these sort of things. That totally went against basically what the master plan had put in place 20 years ago. So to sort of bring that point all together is, I believe that the answer to the question here is effective and responsible planning, both from a community and housing planning standpoint, but also a transportation planning standpoint. And when we've got in the GTA all of these people that we're going to have to fit somewhere and not enough supply to do it, we're going to have a real challenge. And so to get all these people into housing situations, I think the answer is to build cities like we are starting to see now more and more around nodes of density that have transportation hubs with LRTs or bus routes, or are very walkable, that have verticality to them, as not just sprawl, and that doesn't necessarily mean just a downtown core, but different nodes of density throughout the city that are connected. And so I think designing cities and planning cities like that not only allows us to continue to add that density into the city, but do it in a way that will allow different groups of people from both socioeconomic and cultural backgrounds to mix and live together and grow sustainably.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing, the wide range of challenges, but also potential solutions, because of course, when we think of sustainability, we do need many diverse solutions for all those problems. With that in mind, I'll shift a little bit towards a more business focus. Isaac also focused quite a bit on business, and we have a lot of business students watching. So the third question is, how can businesses innovate to continue and kind of support that development of sustainable cities? And I'll pass this back to you, Matt, because I know you're probably a little bit more on the business side. The others are a little bit more non-for-profit and government side.
Yeah, so this is something that is really at the core of the business that we are in. Is how do we remove the business barriers to achieving sustainability? And again, when we're talking about that, the context is with renewable energy. So again, developers, residents, owners, builders, they know that they should be building green. They want to be building green. But then when they see the dollars and cents, they usually say, well, this is more expensive. I don't think I'll do that. We'll just continue a status quo because it's cheap and we know how to do it. So the way that our business model works is what we call an energy as a service model, where we basically become a utility. So we offer an investment in the green energy systems for these buildings, which allow the building developer, owner, et cetera, to save that cost in their pro forma model, in their business case, let's call it. And because these systems are expensive to install but cheap to operate, we solve two problems at once. So we solve that initial capital problem for the upfront investor, and then on for the life of the building, we offer an operating savings for the end user as well. So we're sort of through a business innovation, we're able to get those types of systems out into more and more buildings, and ultimately achieve that sustainability and greenhouse gas reduction that we're targeting.
Great. Does Rosemary or Ian, who wants to go next?
Yeah, I mean, with our movement, we suggest that businesses diversify their supply chain. And so this is one good way to make sure that you're able to benefit from the innovation and the talent that comes from, those small businesses who may never have been able to, to be able to compete for bids on some of these major infrastructure projects. The city of Toronto alone, it's growing. It has the most cranes in North America. So we know that most of the money that's coming from the federal provincial government, is going into Toronto. And regardless of whether it's Toronto, I mean, just in general, Canada is booming and there's a lot of prosperity, that is happening. And so if businesses understand the value of diversifying their supply chain, we think that they could do so much better, because now they're able to tap into a market, that they haven't, been able to before. With our community benefits agreement, social procurement is one of the 5 pillars that we focus on, and out of the 4 community benefits projects that we have been working on so far, that's not a lot, but it's a good start. We've seen about $17 million, in contracts go to the minority-owned businesses, social enterprises, and local businesses. And, if we don't think about those small businesses and those local communities, we run the risk of, annihilating, local neighborhoods and the economy of many neighborhoods. The Eglinton Crosstown project, which was the first one that we had a community benefits agreement on, nobody had thought about the impact on those local businesses as they were building this infrastructure project. And since the development started, about 50% of one neighborhood, Little Jamaica, was practically annihilated. Those businesses had to shut down because of the development. And then COVID came in, and it just made it even so much worse. So when developers are planning for these major infrastructure projects and urban development projects, and if they think about what will the impact be on these local businesses, and already start thinking about what are some of the enabling policies that they can put in place? What are some of the efforts, shop local campaigns, purchasing from local businesses, that can happen. It will be too late once they've already started the project and once the project is already built. And it's really difficult to then go back and to regenerate, the local businesses that would have been destroyed in the process.
Ian, do you have any final thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think both Rosemary and Matt have done a good job of, giving some examples from different business perspectives of, the reality is, every business can make a significant contribution to sustainability. And you start by looking at what your business is. And so, I think of, back in a former life, I was a strategy consultant with a consulting company, 2 businesses. And one of my colleagues went on to be the CEO, or the CEO of Walmart Foundation. Walmart's not my favorite organization, but I had this woman's a Canadian, and so she and I had a walk a year or so ago, and she was sharing with me, some of what they're focusing on at Walmart Foundation, and she said this isn't just about ESG, and kind of it's in one corner of the business. This is about saying, well, what is our business at Walmart? So we're one of the largest purchasers of food. So how do we kind of use that to influence sustainable agricultural practices? How do we make sure, as we look at the food delivery supply chains, that they are sustainable? How do we focus on buying local when we can? When we are accessing food internationally, how do we go all the way down and look at what is the labor force behind that food? And are we buying from providers who are paying appropriately, supporting their workforce appropriately, et cetera? She went on to say, we're a huge employer. And, we don't want Walmart to be a place that's thought of as that's where you go for a dead end job. She said, so we're, really investing. How do we make this a place where people can have career tracks and opportunities to grow and advance, even if that advancement moves them out of the organization itself? So I think those were, and I also remember she talked about, obviously we sell a lot of stuff. So we create a a lot of waste by what we sell because of packaging, etc. So, how can we influence the packaging and the choices we make as a major buyer? So that's a kind of a mega organization and how they can influence sustainability. But, as Rosemary, was referring to, and I know you were talking about big infrastructure projects, but any organization can say, how are we buying? What choices are we making about who we're buying from? What choices are we making about what energy sources we use, etc. So the bottom line is every business has a responsibility to sustainability, and it begins in looking at your business and then looking at the dimensions of sustainability, human, environmental, etc., and saying, okay, let's design a prosperous business that is attentive to all of the dimensions of sustainability.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing, Ian. And I did see, I think Walmart recently announced like their, what's it called, zero waste plans for 2025. So I agree, I'm not a huge fan of Walmart, but it seems like they're starting. I feel like the pressure is on these large corporations. Companies like MATS are kind of have pushed these great companies to kind of force them to be more sustainable as well. So I think that's really great about the movement of how small businesses, like Rosemary was talking, have kind of even influenced larger businesses. Because I think in Canada and worldwide, SMEs are actually a larger percentage of businesses than big corporations. But of course, people tend to follow the trends of big businesses. So it's great to kind of see that trend shifting to big businesses as well. With the final question, as Isaac is one of our, collaborating with us, and also most of our viewers are students and young professionals 30 and under, maybe just as, quick 1 to 2 tips on what you would suggest youth can do to get involved in building sustainable communities and cities. And maybe Ian, you can start, because I imagine you have quite a few youth supporters helping you out.
Yeah, so thank you. I'll offer a couple suggestions. And the first, I will start with Habitat for Humanity. So, one thing is you can come and help us anytime you wish, but a really kind of specific thing is like this notion of we need to make intentional choices about how we live our life. So I think a very practical thing we offer through Habitat for Humanity is actually our restores. So you may have heard of, part of how we kind of generate funds to build homes is we have a social enterprise called Habitat Restores. They sell new and gently used home appliances, home furniture, flooring, home renovation products, etc. So, for anyone listening, if you're thinking of getting new furniture, if you're going to renovate the bathroom, you're going to paint the bathroom, before you head for Etsy or wherever people go, is that what it's called? Wherever people go to buy new stuff, think of going to a Habitat Restore, which, by the way, you can also do online. You can just go to habitatrestore.ca, which is us, and check to see, before you buy something new, is it possible you can buy something gently used or almost new from us. So it's just an intentional choice, saves you some money, and is a sustainable choice in buying new. The second thing I'd say, I'm going to go back to the housing issues that both Rosemary and I have, I guess all three of us have tapped on. For those of you in Toronto or in the GTA, there's a new nonprofit organization of predominantly 30-somethings and under 30-somethings called More Neighbors TO. It is incredibly impressive, or I guess More Neighbors Toronto. It is really working to create a much more informed next generation and to then basically make sure there are young people speaking for the next generation at these various consultations. So when there's new developments, More Neighbors Toronto is helping make sure there's some voices there that are speaking for the people left out and left behind. I live in a neighborhood where within 500 meters from me, there's Loblaw is proposing to do a redevelopment of a 34-story redevelopment from what's just a store right now in a parking lot. I attended the community consultation of it last week and was incredibly impressed that the majority of voices that spoke at that were young voices speaking in favor of, if anything, build more stories on that building, housing for us. And so that's a really practical way that young people can kind of get involved and make a difference to the future of our cities. And then the final comment I would say is the choices that can be made about who you're working for. That's not always an easy choice. Sometimes you need to make a choice, based on you've got to get food on the table, etc. But over the course of your career, really pay attention to, am I working for an organization that shares these values of sustainability? Am I influencing within? And if I'm unsatisfied with who this organization is, there's lots others that can use your talents.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Rosemary, why don't you share your 1 to 2 tips for youth?
Thank you. Just real quickly, and by the way, Ian, thank you for sharing More Neighbors Toronto. I'm going to follow up with them. What I would suggest, yeah, I checked it out real quickly. What I would suggest is that you join the movement. Join the movement for community benefits. Across Canada, across the UK, the United States, there are community benefits coalitions that are out there. And your voice is so important to help make sure that you're also helping to elevate the voices of those who have been left out of the economy, left out of the workforce, left out of the decision making process. What we have found really, really helpful, especially with young people and students in our movement, is their support around research. So even as you're studying and whether you're in law or finance or planning and design, even marketing and communications, you would be so interested to learn that there's a lot that you can contribute through your existing research work that you're doing in school. If you're going to be doing a project, think about how you might be able to bring some of that, your skills, your talent, your learning to helping to move the community benefits agenda forward. Like right now, for example, we're seeking people who can help us with a social return on investment study for the community benefits impact in Toronto. And we would love to be able to count on your support for that. So join the movement, communitybenefits.ca. And there are many other community benefits, groups and coalitions out there, even if it's not the TCBN specifically. Thanks.
Great. Matt, your final 1 to 2 tips.
I'll just give a quick one, and I just want to give a shout out here. I've been broadcasting the whole time here, Ian, from my kitchen table that I bought at a Restore. Kitchen table and chairs for $75, and it's a beautiful set. So yeah, there you go. I guess my final tip would just be, and these two have done a great job of giving a bunch of tips, but I guess I'll just say, for me, the people that you spend your time with and the groups that you're involved with really shape how you think and the action that you take. And so just getting to know people who are doing what you want to be doing, I think is really, really critical. And so that might just mean reaching out, whether that's on, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, email, whatever you can find, just reaching out to people and trying to grow your network. And it doesn't have to be, hey, can I have a job? Because a lot of times the answer to that is, well, what does that mean? That's a hard thing to do. But hey, really like what you're doing. Just wanted to say thank you. A little bit of unsolicited gratitude can go a long way, and who knows, maybe that relationship will turn into something more concrete in the future. But it doesn't hurt to just reach out and let people know that you're supporting what they're doing and show a little bit of appreciation.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks so much for everyone for sharing. I truly appreciate that. And also I'll share, with Thrive, there's many ways that you can benefit and we can support you on your career journey. So as we've kind of discussed in this conversation, there's a lot of opportunities for careers in sustainable communities. So, that's where Thrive is to help. So there's a reward program that we're piloting this month. So if anyone who's watching, you can just go to this link and you can get points, which you can redeem for a career session, introduction to other community members, or also we're launching an impact career program for March, our 7th one. So you can also be pre-selected for that in exchange for those rewards. With that in mind, I also want to just say thanks for all the panelists for sharing all their insights. I really, really enjoyed the discussion and all the diverse perspectives, because I think, sustainable communities, it's a pretty big challenge and so many layers to it. And there's, so many opportunities for the viewers to contribute to solving a lot of these challenges. So hopefully they get some new ideas of how they can contribute, either during their studies through Isaac or in other ways in their careers going forward. So again, Matt, Rosemary, and Ian, thanks so much for your insights and being part of this panel.
Thanks, Mario.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mario.